This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and creatives from around the Inland Northwest. And I'm your host, EJ Iannelli. For this episode, we are back in the Rogue Hard Media studio with Imagine Jazz, but this time with Brendan McMurphy. So welcome, Brendan.
So great to be here, EJ. This is great.
Yeah, so Imagine Jazz and just the jazz community in general has been super busy of late. And so today, I was hoping that we'd be able to kind of cast a look backwards at what's been happening even recently, and then also look ahead to what's coming up in a week's time, which is the International Jazz Day celebration. So it's kind of cool to look both back and forward at what's been happening. So let's start off with what happened on April 4th, which was a community jazz day. Can you talk about some of the folks who were involved in this and why a community jazz day was it meant to kick off International Jazz Month? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Community Jazz Day is all about building community around this phenomenon we call jazz. And it was as much an effort to get some musicians in the same room, checking each other out. We had a nice hang afterwards. We have through a sponsorship that we received recently through Caruso's. We invited all the musicians down to Caruso's to sit down together and just spend some time together off the bandstand to talk and hang out, to kind of address, there's maybe a little bit of siloing that can take place in a scene, even a small scene like this sometimes. I mean, we do intermingle and play together a lot. But sometimes it's easy to just kind of get siloed into your thing and kind of focused on the individual thing that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to just be able to sit down and have some fellowship and hang out with other musicians and check each other out and see what we're all doing. So Community Jazz Day was meant to be a community event that was free to the public, open to the public, in a nice space. Where the musicians get compensated well, so we made sure that we were hitting union scale, and it was music performance trust fund funded to make sure that the musicians were taken care of and that we weren't asking people to play for free.
It's such an important point, this aspect of remuneration. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to overlook that when you're an audience member, but when you're a gigging musician, it's something that's supremely important.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a big boon for me as a performer. And it's also great to help my friends out and make sure that everybody's getting well taken care of and that they feel appreciated for the high level music that everybody performed that day. We had 4 fantastic groups. We had a duo of Riley Gray and Lauren McKinley.
And that was Wind and Water, right?
Yeah, that was called Wind and Water. Really cool Brazilian music that Riley had compiled and a couple of original compositions that he did and some arranging for marimba and piano. And then they had a percussion friend join him as well. So there was some percussion. Fantastic, beautiful music. And then we had Michael Waldrop's Triangularity. Mike Waldrop, for those of you who don't know, is the drum professor at Eastern Washington University, but he's had some national exposure before moving here to take that position. He toured with Elaine Elias, among a number of other people, and he's one of the top, I could argue, top 5 or 6 mallet percussionists in the world as well. Oh, wow. He's one of only a handful of people that's even able to perform a particular piece on marimba for 6 mallets. It's pretty incredible.
And Riley Gray he participated in Wind and Water, and then he came back on for this other set with Triangularity. No?
Correct, yeah. So he was in Mike Waldrop's trio for Triangularity with our friend Josh Skinner, who came up from University of Idaho to play bass. Josh also is a nationally touring musician who does flyouts all over the country. He's recorded soundtrack music for Netflix originals and he's just a fantastic all-around working bass player, and he's a stunning representation of what a working bass player is. He's steady, he's calm, he's easy to work with, and he's always down to play. So very much appreciated him. Then, of course, we had Charlotte Carruthers and Brent Edstrom perform, and having Charlotte back in town is wonderful. The Carruthers family, I'm sure as you're aware, is kind of like a musical dynasty in Spokane and has been for a long time. She's a fantastic performer. She hasn't lost a bit of spunk and fun. Even at this point, and they were supposed to be a duo, but it turned into a quartet fairly quickly.
Well, in keeping with the whole jazz MO, right? You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Yeah, I was already there, and so they just kind of beckoned me onto stage to play.
And were you on drums or were you on trumpet?
I was on drums.
Okay.
And then Eugene came and played with them too. So we ended up having a quartet perform instead of the duo, which was really fun. And then we closed it out with the Brendan Ploeger Quintet. And he did a special program of all Wayne Shorter's compositions with Rachel and myself and Josh Skinner again. And we had, and Brent played piano for that group.
And when Rachel was in here, we talked, if I recall, quite a bit about Wayne Shorter, among other greats. Why the emphasis on Wayne Shorter?
Wayne Shorter, to most of us in the jazz community, ranks right up there with Duke Ellington in terms of his impact as a composer, specifically on the music. He composed a great deal. He was very prolific. He composed with a very unique and personal style that, to me, I would describe to, if you're familiar with fine art, I would describe him as the jazz equivalent of an impressionist. The way he uses harmony and the way he reframes what sound like maybe simple or folk-like melodies with interesting harmony that falls outside of the common practice kind of expectations of how harmony flows, gives me a very impressionistic impression. and it's beautiful and unique, and there's nothing else that sounds like Wayne Shorter's music. And I think that musicians now, and especially after his passing, are just eager to celebrate him and his huge and unique contribution to the music.
Yeah, and if you're doing a set that's all of his charts, then that kind of fulfills Imagine Jazz's role as, not just providing opportunities to jazz musicians, but also raising awareness among the public and developing or cultivating an appreciation for jazz. And so when you've got an entire set and you're like, this is all Wayne Shorter charts, then hopefully the audience is going to pick up on that and say, yeah, this guy is deserving of more appreciation if they weren't aware of him already. Because it's kind of hard to listen to jazz and not be aware of Wayne Shorter, but there's always that knowledge gap.
Certainly. Well, and we all have our favorite periods, and sometimes it's cool to explore how broad his work really is. I mean, he did work with the London Philharmonic and did a whole thing with an orchestra. He did all the fusion work with Weather Report and even a little before that, and with Electric Miles, and then the acoustic, the second quintet with Miles, and then his own Blue Note releases have a totally different feel and vibe to them. So we played some of that material on this show, and it's cool to explore that. And then his quartet, it's interesting to think about, and I hope people start exploring the music of his last quartet before he passed a little more, because that quartet stayed together longer than any of his previous projects.
Oh, no kidding.
And that's really interesting to think about, that quartet he had with Brian Blade, John Patitucci, and Danilo Perez, that lasted 20 years.
No kidding.
And he was only with Miles for, what would that have been, 64 to 69?
Yeah, and I probably would have cited the Weather Report era as being one of the longer ones. But when we enter into fusion, that's when I get a little hazy, because that falls outside of my preferred jazz era. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been re-exploring that myself, because I wouldn't call myself the biggest fusion fan, but Wayne still sounds like Wayne. You listen to that Weather Report stuff or some of the other releases kind of around that time. And it's just so uniquely melodic and beautiful in a way that you wouldn't expect. He's really good at touching on those unexpected areas of your imagination. I just never would have dreamed of that sound coming out of that band, but there it is. His work on Native Dancer with Milton Nascimento. There's another one that he explores Brazilian music on too that's very interesting. Anyway, there's just a number of fantastic Wayne Shorter albums from that era that are worth exploring and really interesting.
And I ask this as a non-musician who hears music and appreciates music, but there are certain things that a musician and a multi-instrumentalist like yourself is going to pick up. From that perspective, what are some things that I, as a lay listener, might be missing about Wayne Shorter? Like, is there an element of his musicianship? And you've already touched on some of this, but is there an element of his musicianship that people who don't play an instrument might find it easy to overlook?
That's a great question. I'm not really sure. I would say that anything that I appreciate about Wayne Shorter is likely something that you can appreciate about Wayne Shorter too.
Well, and maybe therein lies his greatness, you know?
Yeah, because again, his approach to melodic delivery, his unique saxophone tone. I think that you could easily discern. You know, if I played you a Wayne Shorter recording, maybe played you a Charlie Roos recording, I'll bet you could tell the difference maybe in the tone of the saxophone without understanding, like, okay, this guy's using bebop language and this guy's using this kind of more modern sound. You might not know the difference in terms of how chords are expressed or what have you, but I'll bet in the sound and in the melodic delivery, you could tell right away who that is. Like, oh, that's Wayne Shorter, if you've listened to enough of his music.
Yeah, and sometimes with jazz, I would say that what might be unifying for a number of listeners who maybe aren't necessarily musicians but just enjoy the music, they know what they like and they know what they don't like, and so they might not be able to say, oh, that's bebop language, that's more modern language, or more modal language, but I know what I like, and so they might be able to hear a lot of what they like in Wayne Shorter.
Yeah, and I still I try to explore as much as I can too, and push myself outside of my comfort zone, and I try to encourage everybody to do that, musicians and non-musicians alike. It's really easy to just kind of, again, silo yourself off into an area that you're really comfortable with, but sometimes I like to maybe sit in that discomfort for a second, and Wayne has a unique way of, like, even when he's in a format that might not be my favorite, he brings something to it that draws me in, and I can't stop. I'll really start honing in on what he's playing and listen carefully. Native Dancer is one of those records. I mean, there are certainly stylistic things on that record that feel kind of dated. And if you listen to Native Dancer, you might hear that. You might understand, like, well, this is definitely a 70s production. Like, you can tell it's a 70s vibe. But Wayne brings this magic to it, and you just can't stop listening to him.
Well, it's just like a 50s and 60s vibe. And it's so weird how artistic development often takes place in eras or decades, and I don't think too much of this is forced upon it. But whether you're talking music or art, it does seem like humans like to regenerate every 10 years or so, especially in the 20th and 21st centuries. There does seem to be this this evolution that is marked by decades. So you'll have this slow evolution, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in the thick of the 70s, where you've got the electric piano and stuff like that, and you're like, oh, I definitely associate that with this decade.
Yeah, it's like you can almost smell the Crown Royal and the polyester when you're listening to it. Like, there's this weight to the sound, and I can always tell when it's a 70s production, just things about it,
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting that you say weight, because I also see a lightness to it, and maybe that is kind of the electric piano and things like that, where the instrumentation and the language that they're speaking does seem to be a little lighter, and I always associated it a bit with disco.
Oh yeah,
and,
totally.
And
absolutely.
being informed by that, where disco seemed a little lighter and a little more carefree. Yeah, before we get into the real confectionery pop of the 80s and things like that.
Yeah.
But with the Community Jazz Day, so I wasn't aware of this more communal aspect among the musicians. So when I heard Community Jazz Day, and I unfortunately wasn't able to make it because as we were catching up beforehand, and I mentioned I was at Print Fest, and so you had these, it's nice to have competing events, even though you can't be in two places at once.
Right.
So this happened at the library, and when I heard about Community Jazz Day, I imagined very much that it was for the listening community, or for the audience community, which I'm sure it was,
100%.
But also you mentioned this musical aspect, or this musician aspect, where it was a chance to kind of come together and maybe I wouldn't say forge those friendships, but maybe tighten them a little bit, or get to know folks a little bit better.
Yeah, I love the kind of mini festival format for that. It's just so rare. Usually, it's like our band is off playing our Bad Seed or Indigo gig, and somebody else is off playing Everuse, and somebody else is off doing this or that, or and we're just rarely ever together. Whereas I think in like the indie scene, you see a lot more of bands sharing bills to try to get more people out. But then you got like, 2, 3, maybe 4 bands that are all probably friends, likely related in one way or another. And they get to have this community that we don't always get to have just on our day-to-day gigs,
Yeah.
So,
and
yeah,
it's interesting
important.
that you compare them, because I think of like the punk and indie pop scene around like 221 Press. And yeah, you've got a lot of bands that are sharing bills, but there's also this swapping, and so you'll see the same constellation of bands, but they'll move in and out. With the jazz scene, how would you describe it these days? So it's almost kind of 1 year on since I talked to Rachel, and a lot has happened since then. You've featured, you've had you've had a sellout show with the Cookers. So, are we seeing a more active music scene within the jazz community? Are more folks coming on and participating in that?
I think so. Rachel has commented to me, and I've noted as well, that when we do these shows, it seems like every time it's like, where did all these people come from? I don't know who these people are. Usually, where in the past, it's always like, there's
familiar
the
faces.
familiar cats, like, oh yeah, we know some of these cats are going to be here, and some of them are. But yeah, like with the Cookers too, and then this last minute show we got together with Jonathan Scales, he's a great fusion steel pan player, very interesting, and it was sold out. And again, there was just gobs of people in there that I didn't recognize.
Which is you wouldn't, with an instrument like the steel pan, you would not. Maybe I'll speak for myself. I would not expect a sellout crowd. So the fact that happened, I think, is really encouraging. That people are willing to say, you've got this niche instrument, for all intents and purposes, and yet folks are saying, that's what I want to hear, that's what I want to see.
It was hip. It was extremely varied from one tune to the next. And I love that Jonathan gave us a really great introduction to his instrument and kind of talked about what we could expect before he even started playing. It was really cool because he said, guys, if you're expecting, calypso, or, if you're expecting, cruise ship entertainment music, just throw that idea right out the window, because that's not what we're going to do. And he didn't, and it was beautiful. And, even if he did, I think it still would have been cool. He was a great musician. And the music was cool. And there's obviously a lot of great musical tradition in the Caribbean, that maybe he could have gone that direction and it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been an issue. But the fact that he took that instrument in a totally different direction was really, really neat and refreshing and fun to hear.
Well, and again, it shows that maybe audiences are going and hoping to have some of their expectations challenged. And that's kind of the best audience right there. Someone who doesn't say, hey, just play the hits, but rather says, I'm okay with having some of my assumptions and some of my preconceptions about this instrument or this genre or whatever it is, and having those challenged.
We had a couple of challenging shows this last year. I don't know if Rachel had touched on them, because I think they happened since you talked to her, but we had a fantastic New York group out they were an avant-garde ensemble. Like, this was definitely challenging music. It was well outside of what people would expect from traditional jazz, especially in our region. But I was amazed at the audience reaction to it. They loved it, because I think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling about music and the way especially non-musicians engage with it. And I would say that most of us, and I count myself in this, I care way more about whether someone is being authentic and being real about who they are than whether it's music I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and I would say the same. And again, maybe this comes down to individual values. So I can really only speak for myself as a non-musician. But yeah, that authenticity in any art form is hugely important. Just the fact that when somebody's up there, they're not doing anything, they're performing, but not in a performative way.
Yeah, so definitely we had a couple of what would have been challenging music, and I was so proud of the Spokane scene for, first of all, showing up, and secondly, just being really receptive to some things that may have been outside of what they would expect when they see a show that has the jazz label on it. Hearing some avant-garde, some more experimental, more novel ways of organizing sound than they may have expected.
But when we talk about preconceptions, is avant kind of the popular conception of jazz? maybe there's two competing images of jazz. You have the folks in a smoky basement club with berets on, and that's maybe the more kind of bebop era of the 1950s and 1960s, but a very kind of stereotypical view of that. And then you've got the other extreme, which is just folks noodling on their instruments and a kind of a new agey approach. And so I would say that when it comes to jazz stereotypes or jazz preconceptions, you have maybe these two competing extremes among the general public. And so, again, the fact that folks came out to an Avant show and said, again, kind of, all right, I'm here to be challenged. I'm here to, to listen with an open mind.
Yeah, and I had a gentleman walk up to me after that show who moved here from Chicago recently. And I get this a lot, and you might be able to attest to this too. Maybe you've talked to people who feel this way, but I always bump into people at these shows that say, I had no idea this was happening here.
Yeah.
And it's so common. And it's too common, in my opinion. I just think that, but I do think that the audience is waking up. I think that more and more people are coming to these shows and coming out to the local gigs too. And taking notice, like a lot of people that are maybe from another city and they moved here and it just felt like they gave up, like they just quit trying to find, I'm not going to find anything like what was in Chicago or San Francisco or Seattle here. Well, I'm not going to find that here. So they just quit looking, and then they'll come out and then they're always pleasantly surprised. And that's whether I'm playing in a local ensemble or we have internationally touring guests through. They just go, I had no idea this was happening here.
And so let me parse that statement. So I had no idea this was happening here. Are they talking about the fact that it's a little experimental? Are they talking about the fact that jazz in general? What exactly are they referring to, or is it all of the above?
I think it's all of the above. I think they're speaking to the idea that maybe someone who came up in a larger city wouldn't expect there to be a jazz scene here. I think that also speaks to people feeling like maybe they wouldn't expect very progressive music to happen here. I've also, maybe not, not that I was terribly offended, but sometimes, I've been playing with local groups and somebody will come up and they'll just go, oh, I can't believe you guys are local. You guys are so good.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's that supposed to mean? I think Spokane's as cool as any other place that you could be. And there's fantastic musicians here.
Well, if this isn't on their radar, then I think it's easy to fall into that assumption that there isn't going to be good jazz or the jazz that they like. And again, this was something that came up, I think, it not only came up with Rachel, but I think it comes up in a lot of conversations that I have about jazz, is that, again, you get into these preconceptions. And so when passersby are experiencing jazz, you think they just kind of maybe casually stumble across jazz. It comes across as surprising and unexpected in the most pleasant way possible. And it's like, wow, not only am I enjoying this, but wow, it's going on in Spokane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it puts an onus on us as artists. Boy, that's a funny thing to say. An onus on us. That sounds like a chart title. Anyway, like we talked about with authenticity, to engage in this culture authentically, not performatively, to get away from some of the stereotypes that might frustrate listeners, that maybe, some of the detractors and critics of jazz might look at a jazz scene, especially a local one, and say, well, you guys are just playing out of a fake book and you're just reading, it doesn't feel like you. It doesn't feel genuine. You're just primarily playing standards, which is a whole other discussion.
But you are playing original charts, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Typically. But we also play standards. But when we do play standards, I want to engage with them authentically. I want to be myself. I want to be me. And I want to project the story of that music in my voice and in my way. So I relate engaging with jazz to like storytelling and even like role-playing games. And this is kind of a silly analogy, but bear with me for a minute. It's like if you and I were going to play Satin Doll.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's an old standard. It's an old swing standard.
Okay.
Fantastic tune. Cigarette holder. It's just a great little tune.
Okay.
But you and I know that story.
So I thought you were talking about Satin Doll as a role-playing game.
Oh, no.
And so I was like, I haven't. Okay, we're good. We're good. decontextualized it there.
But much like a role-playing game, you're going to be EJ and I'm going to be Brendan, and we're going to bring our experiences into this thing where we expound on the idea of Satin Doll in the moment and in our own way right now, and it all kind of unfolds in real time, where we're not trying to be cliched about it, but we also understand where it came from and what it is. So I just think that's hugely important, and I try to do that. I know all the other great musicians in town try to do the same thing, and we try to avoid this idea that we can just flip open a fake book and kind of flippantly read through a melody and that's supposed to be good enough to entertain people.
Yeah. And I hate to say this because I don't want to even suggest that authenticity isn't a part of other genres or isn't a part of other art forms. I think it's integral to all of them. 100%. But for some reason, when I think of jazz, I think of authenticity. I feel like it was very much born out of an authentic experience and an authentic desire to express that experience in music. And so I would associate with it as a close cousin of blues music as well. And so it seems to me like jazz and authenticity, and I guess you can have artifice enter into any art form. Certainly. Again, so I hate to apply blanket statements, but again, when I'm doing those kind of knee-jerk reactions or knee-jerk associations, jazz and authenticity kind of go hand in hand.
Certainly, yeah, I would agree, and I think authenticity is a key aspect of any appreciated music. I really feel like even if you're going to get up there at a party and play whatever, I don't know, a Jimmy Buffett song or something because you're playing for a party, and that's you can do so authentically. You can come at it with some appreciation for what that music is and what it's for and how to come across with it without cheapening it or without, you can bring the same level of technical understanding and apply yourself to playing cover music as you could playing an original composition or something that's more serious.
Yeah.
So I just think that's a big deal in music, and it's certainly a big deal in jazz, and I want to make sure that whenever I'm playing, I'm trying to do so as authentically as I can.
Since you brought it up, I think that offers a good springboard to talk about the wider jazz scene of today, and maybe the jazz scene in Spokane is kind of a microcosm of that. But we have a music that was very much born out of the Black culture and African American culture, and then compare that to today, where we see it's and you had mentioned this before we even started talking about jazz's contemporary links to academia and how it's seen as a more maybe cerebral or intellectual music. And so there are folks coming out of music schools, folks who have had the wherewithal to pay for those music schools and then are now performing in this genre. So where does that leave jazz as an ethos, as a kind of MO in addition to a music?
Well, first and foremost, I really think that jazz is a cultural phenomenon, and we have to respect the culture that it came out of. And to address it appropriately in an academic setting, we have to do that. I don't think jazz should or does exist outside of the culture that it came out of. I think that we're all invited to participate in it. And so when I'm teaching, I adjuncted at Whitworth and I adjuncted at SFCC. When I'm teaching, I'm constantly inviting the students to participate.
And what does that mean?
Well, to me, that means deep exploration and listening and engagement in the building of their fundamental ability on their instrument and taking it seriously so that they can then, I call it projecting oneself through the lens of jazz. We have to polish that lens so that we can accurately be ourselves through it. And if you have a cloudy lens, you can't see anything. So we have to know the tradition, and we have to know where the music came from so that when I project myself through it, you're getting a clear picture of who I am in that context.
But does that end up resulting in a situation, And I would say, classical music runs contrary to a lot of stereotypes. So when we talk about popular preconceptions, people imagine a genre that is very wedded to the canon. And while the canon does certainly factor into that, it's not beholden to that canon. There's new classical music, like Sidney Guillaume down at the Spokane Symphony, all these new compositions that are being made. So with jazz, just like we're doing kind of today, where we're looking back and we're looking forward, how do you maintain that balance between having respect for the origins of the genre and the standards like Satin Doll and others, and then looking ahead and making sure that it's remaining kind of fresh and vibrant?
I think that whether I'm teaching or performing, I try to focus on being myself in it, and encouraging students to be themselves in it, and being where they are, and understanding that students are developing. And I don't have this lofty expectation that they're going to come out and, blow me away with some new concept or with their ability to like perfectly emulate somebody else's style. But I do emphasize that we start out by imitating and copying, but we don't stay there, and we don't perform that way. We don't copy when we're performing. We have our influences, and you can hear my influences when I play, but we don't copy. We are ourselves, and so there's a methodology to learning the building blocks and the fundamental skills of playing jazz music, but then learning to manipulate them with your own imagination, and that's the part we have to get to. We have to build those fundamentals first, and we have to listen and copy to get there to a certain extent, but we don't want to stay there. The great jazz educator Brad Good calls it feigned competency.
Yeah.
When you get a college student or a high school age student who's really good at copying a style, like they can, I call it regurgitation. You can regurgitate licks. You've memorized these licks, and you can just kind of barf them up one after the next without being engaged in the real ethos of jazz that I think that non-listeners in some ways I think are more attuned to, of just being yourself and being in the moment right now.
Yeah, and there's that authenticity.
And it doesn't mean that there isn't a common language that we're using, and I disagree with Brad Good on that point. I do think that there is a language around jazz that you can learn. It's not obviously a real language. It doesn't work like English, but there is certainly, the building blocks are there, and then you play with them. You arrange them yourself, and it's really no different than what you and I are doing. I didn't write any of this down, but I'm speaking a language that you understand and you can hear me. So,
well, it's like how we learn. I mean, it's good that you brought up the linguistic parallel, because it's like how we learn language. As toddlers, we do so largely through mimicry at first, and then as we begin to command it a little bit more, hopefully.
Yeah.
Then we can start experimenting with it.
100%. And I think that communicating the gravitas of the situation to a student is sometimes difficult, because I don't want to scare them away from the idea or tell them that they can't participate. I want everybody to know that they can participate. However, there's another great educator, I'm trying to think of who it was, who's put it this way, but he said, you would never fly to Germany, get off the plane, and say, oh, I can make German sounds, and then start making kind of offensive approximations of what you think German sounds like as an American. That would be very offensive to a German-speaking person, But you would take it very seriously. Like if you were going to go to Germany and spend an extended amount of time there, and you understand that you might need to speak some German to function, you're going to take that very seriously, and you're going to really work on your pronunciation and make sure that you're understood. And it doesn't, and yeah, at the beginning, it's going to feel like you're just kind of reciting canned sentences, because you don't really understand. You're not going to be able to, construct complex thoughts at first. But the more you do it, and the more you immerse yourself in it, the more, it takes a relatively little amount of time, and you'll be speaking fluently another language, and you're able to really express subtlety, humor, irony, things like that in another language, just by being immersed in it and participating in it.
Yeah. And, I've always enjoyed it, when we move away from mimicry, and then, once, musicians have a greater command of their instrument. There are so many quotes in jazz, and just like you would find in classical music, where people, one composer would quote another in order to, just kind of bundle in all that was associated with that. So you've got the musical meaning, but you've also got the meanings beyond that. And so, I'm always a fan of when, you'll get someone during a solo and they'll quote something from another musician. You'll be like, oh, I caught that. And you get, again, that musical meaning, but then all that's bound up in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that too. And the quotes thing can be, maybe a little bit of a cliche sometimes, but I have learned to appreciate it as I've gotten older, because some musicians are really clever with how they use their quotes, and there's humor in what they're kind of insinuating with some quotes. I wish I had a good example off the top of my head to mention to go listen to, but I can't think of anything right now. But you hear a musician that's good at quoting, and it's funny. And it's deep, and it shows a depth of developing that language, that they're able to take this thing from over here and retrofit it into this thing over here in an organic and musical way that sounds conversational and authentic without sounding like it's being forced.
Yeah, and I think, one of the examples that springs to mind, and it's not overly clever or overly subtle, but there's a Clifford Brown Max Roach album with Parisian Thoroughfare, and the pianist quotes the can in that. And so it's just, a little aside, you get it if you get it. And so where does the jazz scene now find itself in Spokane? Do you feel as though there are new musicians coming onto the scene, and that it's in a good place, and you're not seeing the same faces, or do you feel like there's still a lot more room to grow?
I think yes. I think that both things are true. I think that it's a cycle, and I think that there's always going to be new up and comers, and there's going to be new people that move into town, and some people that leave. And we're always sad when they leave, and it always feels like maybe a great high school or college musician will start coming up, and you just hope they stick around, but they don't always.
Well, that's kind of the MO of Imagine Jazz, is to create these opportunities so they don't feel like they have to go to a larger city. And of course, they're always going to have the allure. But to create more opportunities here in Spokane and this region, so that folks don't feel, they're not lured away by the bright lights, big city.
Yeah, and we just want more of it here. So absolutely, I think there's lots of room to grow here, and I think that we could do more. I think that even outside of Imagine Jazz and our kind of sister program, Spokane All City Jazz, I think that there's so much more room for education and outreach to be happening, for younger people to get involved. In fact, on April 30th, on our International Jazz Day, we're going to have a student stage over in the mall on the third floor, where a number of sage groups are going to perform. One of the Whitworth Jazz Ensembles is going to play. I think we're going to have an SFCC group there, and we're trying to create opportunities for them to engage with it as well, the students as well as the professionals. And the more we can get them to integrate, I think the better. I think all of the jazz greats came from somewhere. And there used to be a much stronger history of mentorship in the music than what I think we see now.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's hugely important. When I grew up playing, I had the benefit of having a fantastic middle school band director who was a jazz musician. She's a fantastic piano player and vocalist, and her husband played drums.
And was that here locally?
No, that was in the Tri-Cities.
Oh, okay.
And from the earliest days, she was dragging me on stage with her. Then you're going to learn this melody. You're going to learn Ain't Misbehavin', or you're going to learn Bye Bye Blackbird or something. And those were the first two tunes I think I learned with her. And just getting to perform with real professionals was kind of like a fast track to like learning how to play, because it's hard to expect students to develop when they're not being given a sterling example all the time. They're just kind of stuck playing with each other. And they need to hear and engage with and interact with great players.
Yeah.
So Imagine Jazz, we want to keep bringing these groups in, not only to enrich the community and the audiences, but we really want and encourage student participation. We want the students meeting these musicians, coming to the clinics, which I'd like to see grow. We want the artists to present an educational opportunity, and have the kids work with them, get worked with and played, and in some cases get to play with these great players. And it's just hugely important. I think it's something that's been lost over the years, that we want to help bring back. Like, this is a community, everybody, big and small in the music, new or old, should just be getting together and learning from each other. And the kids can't learn if they can't be around great players. Not that their educators aren't good or whatever. I'm not trying to say that any school director is doing something wrong or anything, but I just want to see more engagement. And so I love seeing what SJO is doing, how they're reaching out educationally. I love being involved with Spokane All City Jazz and doing that, and then Imagine Jazz bringing these artists in. And we always try to make sure that those groups are accessible for students and that there's an educational aspect whenever possible, that those groups are working with and bringing the kids in so they can learn directly with them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up the mentorship angle, because that's something that I feel is can be missing from contemporary pedagogy, because the instructor-student or teacher-student relationship is different than a mentor-mentee relationship. Mm-hmm. I just envision, wisdom and warmth that might come from the mentor-mentee relationship that might not exist in the instructor-student relationship, or maybe that's just how I perceive it. But it allows for maybe more informal relationships to develop, and musical relationships, so that folks can get learn from their elders in a way. That that you're right. When I think back to kind of the golden ages of jazz, so many of those up and coming musicians had mentors, mm-hmm. and then those up and coming musicians in turn became mentors.
Yeah, and every small town to big city to the tiniest of communities had dance bands, and there were regional dance bands that would tour around. And so young musicians, maybe if I were born in the 20s or 30s and came up into the 40s, likely when I was 16 or 17, I would have been running around with a regional dance band and learning from older musicians and playing with them. That's why I love the Masterclass Big Band and what they're doing. I think that that's also really important. So, and I bring up all these organizations to highlight that I think there is a lot of healthy things going on in the Spokane community, but I still think there could just be more of it.
Yeah. So you had just mentioned this, but this is the International Jazz Day on April 30th, and this is going to culminate International Jazz Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. What sort of lineup have we got going on, and what's taking place with this? Oh, and I apologize. I had mentioned that the Community Jazz Day was at the library, but it was actually at Music City.
That's correct.
And so I got my locations muddled.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so the Community Music Day was at Music City, and that was a smaller venue. We had about 140 people come through for those performances, and hang out with us and check out the great music. The International Jazz Day celebration is going to be at the Public Library on the 3rd floor where the stage is, and then across the Sky Bridge over in the food court, we'll have another stage with our student ensembles performing as well. So we've got Rogan Tinsley's quintet, and unfortunately he couldn't join us today, but that's going to be great. We have Nick Shower with Friends group, which is just I love that. I've gotten to play with Nick a bunch, and I love that whole thing. It's just hilarious. Kristina Ploeger's quintet is going to perform, and Brent Edstrom's trio, and then we have the large 10-piece ensemble that Rachel put together as part of her CMA grant. The Glass Bead Orchestra is going to perform. And then
and they had their debut at Hamilton Studio, I think just ahead of the time when I talked to Rachel last. They were preparing for their debut, and they've since recorded their album. Mm-hmm. And so that project is really moving ahead, and so it's good to see that that's getting reprised.
Absolutely, and I'm hoping that we can keep. It's always difficult to book 10 people.
Yeah,
but I'm hoping she can keep that moving forward and keep presenting it, because it's such interesting music, and it's cool to see that happening again here, seeing more kind of avant-garde oriented music and concepts happening in our region.
Although you classify it as avant and maybe that is how it might be characterized, but I found it incredibly accessible. And so even though I think Avant is often associated with kind of being a little out there, I found it incredibly accessible. And
Cool.
yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I feel the same way. I think it is very accessible and very listenable music. And I find most music to be that way. Even music that is the only thing that to me that makes music avant-garde in the most literal sense is that they're using previously unexplored or unheard of ways of organizing sound. It doesn't necessarily mean that the sound is going to be abrasive or that it's going to be overtly weird. It just means that they're using new tools or they're finding new ways of putting sounds together and organizing their performance and their ensemble. And so Rachel uses a technique called conduction.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she probably talked a little bit
Yeah,
about
she
that
went
with
into
you,
that,
but,
yeah.
you know, that's a technique where a conductor uses a series of hand signals to conduct the improvisations of the ensemble. So there's an aleatoric element, there's an improvisational element, and then there are these hand signals. But the music that can result doesn't necessarily have to sound abrasive or overtly strange. I think that some really sonorous sounds came out of our explorations that night at Hamilton Studio and in performances since and on the record too. I was surprised at how cohesive some of those things were. There's another piece that we performed where the inspiration of the piece, the music for a section of it was a picture of 5 rivers. And we interpreted the rivers as an ensemble improvisationally. And I was surprised at how cohesively that came together and how it sounded like
How fluidly.
it was just
appropriately.
great,
Yeah.
It was great music, but with a really unusual, probably not novel anymore. I mean, plenty of people have done that, picture scores and whatnot. But that is an unusual way to create music. But some highly sonorous and fascinating sounds came out of it.
Yeah. And when I as I said it, within nanoseconds after the words coming out of my mouth, I realized that, by I didn't want to use kind of accessible in any pejorative sense. It's accessible while being adventurous, and that's, I think, therein lies its appeal, because I found that there was an easy way in as a listener, but it would also kept me engaged because there was this conductive or conduction element to it.
Yeah, and I absolutely want anything I play anyway to be very accessible. Right? I want people to feel like they can engage with it and that they can understand it on an emotional level.
Yeah.
Even if there's technical things happening, or maybe if you're not quite sure if it's in a key or if you're not quite sure what the time signature is, I would hope that people can feel something.
Yeah.
And they can see me projected through that music, that they feel the humanity in it.
Yeah.
And not just the unusualness of it, or that it felt. I would never want music to feel unapproachable.
And there again, we go all the way back to authenticity, because I think that's what it comes down to, is that when you're performing authentically, you are able to kind of get that cosmic harmony with another human being, that comes through that. So
Totally. And then the last group we have on April 30th is the Will St. Peter Quintet featuring Vern Seelert. Vern Seelert's a great trumpet player, been in the area a long time, teaching at U of I, and he was in Seattle before that, and he grew up in New York. He is a fantastic regional trumpet player, and Will St. Peter's a great guitar player. He's relatively new in the area. He's from the East Coast and then spent time in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and went to UNT, and now...
so you are getting newcomers. That's kind of good. Yeah.
So Will is one of our newcomers that has been on the scene for a couple of years now, but he's just a fantastic musician. He's very seasoned for his young age. I get to call him a youngin because I'm a bit older than him. But he's so seasoned and experienced, and it's just so great to have him. I hope he doesn't go away. I want to keep him here. He's such a great player. And I'm going to get to perform with that group too, and he's picked some really fascinating music to play that's going to be cool.
Well, again, the more opportunities there are, the more likely he is to stay. So,
Yeah, and then on the River Park Square Mall 3rd floor stage, we're going to have Aaron Hill's 100 Years of Miles and Coltrane from WSU. That's a mixed group of faculty and students from WSU. Saxophonist Aaron Hill. The Imagine Joy, which is the jazz opportunities for young artists that Rogan helps us run through Imagine Jazz. Is again a mixed ensemble of college and high school students, advancing high school students. They play really great. It's original music, and I love that ensemble really embodies what I think jazz education could be, because it's so fresh, It's original. They're not out just, regurgitating standards. Not that I really think kids should learn to play jazz standards. I really do. But I also think that new composition and new arranging should happen, and that, again, they get to authentically be themselves in this new music, and to see the excitement on their faces when they're presenting new music is just really cool. And then we've got some Spokane City Jazz ensembles, Whitworth Studio Jazz, and then the Spokane Falls Community College Combo is going to play as well.
And is this all free?
It's all free. It's all free and open to the public.
That's fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you're playing in the library, is it going to be kind of standing, or are there going to be seats? I'm just curious as to what that concert would look like and how free flowing it's going to be.
I believe,
or is that TBD?
No, there'll be chairs, and I plan to have chairs out. I think people need to be able to sit. I want people to be comfortable. But there'll be a rotating. The stage is gonna rotate out, and there'll be a little pause in between each group, maybe a 10 or 15-minute pause to kind of reconfigure. And then the next group will start, and we're gonna rock and roll from, what is that gonna be, 1 until about 7 or so? It's gonna be a long day. It's gonna be fun. Sure.
Yeah, but I'm sure. For the musicians, it's gonna be.
Yeah, it's gonna run. I mean, Rogan Tinsley starts at 1 p.m. and Will St. Peter's Quintet with Vern Seelert is at 7.
Okay.
So it's going to go till at least 8.
So which ones of these? So Glass Bead, I'm assuming you're going to perform in, but what other ensembles are going to feature you?
I'm going to play with Will St. Peter's Quintet, playing drums with him. I'm going to play with Rogan Tinsley's group, and
all drums.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any trumpet on this one. I hope I'm not misspeaking. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. But those are the 3 that I'm sure I'm playing, and I might be playing in one of the other ones too.
Okay, so it's going to be a long but fun day for you.
And I try hard not to, being involved with Imagine Jazz. It's easy to just kind of, slip into every band that performs, but I try really hard not to. And I think that it's important that there are lots of other great players in town. The Spokane's actually pretty deep.
Yeah.
On talented musicians, and try to get as many people as involved. But I'm also, if my friend Will wants me to play drums, I'm not going to tell him no. So, and I get to perform with Brent a lot too. But I'm not sure if I might be playing with him, but it's also possible somebody else might be playing with him as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's great to get to play, but I try to make sure I'm not just purposefully inserting myself into every single band that performs, and it's that can get a little sticky.
Yeah, and I mean it's nice to have these opportunities too, to play with different sets of musicians, so you feel like you're getting to flex different muscles.
100%. Yeah, I get to wear different hats, as it were.
Cool. So that's coming up on the 30th, and right until then, we have the lightning round to round off this interview.
Okay.
Are you familiar with this? Rachel didn't prepare you for this?
No.
Okay.
All right. In the spirit of the lightning round.
In the spirit of the lightning round, and in the spirit of jazz too, to keep things kind of spontaneous. So so it's 4 questions.
Okay.
Always begins with an either or question. So you're going to be presented with a bit of a dilemma. And I gave you, for this, no good option, really. Okay.
Okay.
So for a full year, you either have to be dressed to the hilt, and I mean, sports jacket, tie, the works, or you have to be dressed down for every occasion. So there's no, for the things you would normally be dressed down for, you're going to be dressed to the hilt, and for the stuff that you would normally be dressed up for, you're going to be dressed down. So you've got to choose either dressed to the hilt or dressed down for an entire year. Which are you going to go with?
Dressed to the hilt, no question.
Oh, really? Okay.
Seriously, I will go to bed in a Brooks Brothers suit, no problem.
No, I had no idea you had a, kind of more dapper side.
Oh yeah, I love dressing up when I get the opportunity. I am due for a new suit. It's been a little while since I've had a new suit made, but Rachel got me a lovely blue suit recently that I really like wearing, but I need to get another one.
Okay.
But I do like dressing up, and if I really had to choose, I mean, I like to dress casual too, but if I really super had to choose, I would probably choose dressing up over being overtly casual on a performance.
I imagine that was going to be tough, and you're like, no, I'm quite comfortable going with dressing to the nines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Well, easy first question for you then. Second question: is there a conspiracy theory that you would really like to believe? And I'm thinking, UFOs. I'm thinking, we're open to any conspiracy theory.
It would be my dream to meet a Bigfoot. I would love for Bigfoot to be real. I love this idea that there's some mystery in the world and that we don't understand it all and that we haven't seen everything and that something intelligent has slipped our view for millennia, and we have very, very little evidence that, because people claim they've seen them or have seen footprints or whatever, but we have very little scientific evidence that a Bigfoot exists. But
Right.
I love this idea that maybe I could be in the woods someday fishing or something and bump into a Bigfoot that's been there, for generations and millennia that we just have never bumped into before or gotten to study or abuse yet as human beings, being the awful creatures we are. That there's some untouched critter, highly intelligent critter that is intelligent enough to avoid us.
Yeah. Well, I think there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who would agree with you and say, yeah, I would love for the Yeti, for the Bigfoot to be legit. But I think maybe that also explains some of the appeal of conspiracy theories, is that it does restore some of the magic and the mystery to a world that, a lot of which we've figured out. It's not to say mysteries don't exist and there isn't plenty more to unravel, but
Sure.
just kind of keep the magic in the world. Mm-hmm. Did you have more thoughts on the Yeti?
Well, of course, but we can move on.
All right. Third question. I'd like a book, an album, or a film that had a really profound effect on you. And I wanted to open it up beyond, because it's very easy for us to be kind of music centric, but I wanted to open that up to other genres and other disciplines.
A book, an album, or a film?
Yeah.
For a film, I'd just have to say like what is that? The History of the World. Is it a Monty Python movie I'm thinking of?
See, this is the disadvantage of the lightning round, is that, all of a sudden we're moving out of music, out of our core conversation. And so the meaning of life, is that what we're talking about?
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
And so it's like, oh man, you're calling on other parts of your brain to fill in those gaps. So the meaning of life.
I love where slapstick, ridiculous humor meets just incredibly clever messaging and delivery, and I just feel like those guys nail it every time. It's just so funny and so apropos for the time it was made, and they can poke fun and poke holes in just absolutely anything, and it's hilarious and also just insanely clever. And it's something I actually enjoy about good comedy in general. Of just it's not just absurd, which it obviously is incredibly absurd, but it's so clever, just insanely clever, every little detail. It was a movie that Rachel and I just watched recently, the Fockham Hall.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
It's a movie on HBO that it's so insanely clever. It definitely gives me Leslie Nielsen vibes in terms of the kind of humor that's going on. It reminds me a lot of Airplane or some of those kind of movies. But everything in that movie, you have to just pause it and read everything. Read the little labels on every little thing. There's just a number of hilarious little Easter eggs all over that movie that are just really funny and really clever.
I wasn't familiar with it, but it does sound like it's in kind of my vein, because I enjoy Monty Python, but the Zucker Brothers comedies, Airplane and the original Naked Guns. I have a soft spot for those. So.
Certainly, and I couldn't argue that those didn't shape my, growing up.
Your sensibility,
my sensibilities as an adult and things I find humorous.
Cool. All right. And then finally, so you had a first job at some point. I don't know when that was. Did you have a job as a kid or a teenager? Okay. How did you spend your money from your first job? Was there something that you were saving up for?
I think the first major purchase I made with money that I earned on my own was a pair of combat boots.
Real combat boots. Okay.
Yeah.
Do tell.
I really wanted a pair of combat boots. I have I wasn't a particularly punkish kid, but I did like to hover around the Army surplus store, and I just thought I needed a pair of combat boots, and they were the most uncomfortable things I think I've ever worn, but by God, I wore them, and I wore.
Well, you
camping.
paid for them with your own money, so you.
Yeah, I polished them. I kept them clean and polished, but I also wore them camping and hiking and whatnot, and they were horribly uncomfortable and gave me blisters, and it was terrible. But I loved those boots.
Combat boots. Of all the objects in the world that I might have predicted that you would have bought with your first money, like a skateboard, a stereo, an album, something like that. I don't think in a million years I would have said, it's going to be combat
That
boots.
was probably my first major purchase on my own. I mean, I bought CDs, and I think the first CD I bought with my own money was a Roy Hargrove CD called Family. I found it in a used store in Portland. My dad took me on a special trip to go see my uncle and just to visit the Monette factory, which is a place that makes really high-end trumpets. So I got to check them out, and we went to we went to a CD store, and I bought this. I bought a couple of CDs with some cash I had. But I considered that a small purchase. Like the first thing I really saved up for was.
Yeah, and it's not nearly as interesting as combat boots.
No, not at all. And my parents were really supportive of my musical development, so I didn't have to save my own money for trumpet gear or whatever. They were very supportive of my musical pursuits, so that wasn't something that I had to concern my financial self with when I was that young.
Yeah, instead you just blew it all at the Army Navy surplus.
Yeah, bingo. Yeah. I was getting either gags or combat boots or a backpack or something weird.
Well, cool, Brendan. Thank you so much for coming in today and talking about what Imagine Jazz has been up to, and then what we can look forward to in a week's time. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.